The mailman caught me on the porch one Tuesday morning in late September, and the way he hesitated before handing me my bundle of letters told me something was wrong before he ever opened his mouth. His name is Walter, and he's been delivering mail on my street in Cedar Falls for going on 11 years now. He knows my dog by name. He knows I take my coffee out on the porch swing every morning at 7:15. He knew my husband Howard before the cancer took him, and he was one of the few people who came to the funeral and actually stayed for the meal afterward. So when Walter shifted his weight from one foot to the other and looked down at his shoes, I knew. "Mrs. Halloran," he said. He always called me that, even after I told him 100 times to call me Marlene. "I don't mean to pry, I really don't, but I need to ask you something, and I'd appreciate it if you'd hear me out before you tell me to mind my own business." I set my coffee cup down on the railing. "Walter, you go ahead and say whatever's on your mind." He took a breath. "Are you expecting any kind of legal mail? From a title company? Or a notary? Or anything to do with your house?" I felt my stomach tighten in a way I hadn't felt since the morning Howard's oncologist called us into his office without warning. "No. Why would you ask me that?" Walter glanced over his shoulder at his truck, then back at me. "Because in the last 6 weeks, I've delivered 3 certified letters to this address that weren't addressed to you. They were addressed to a Bartholomew Sweeney, care of your address. I figured the first time it was a mistake, but it kept happening. And then last week there was a thick envelope from a title insurance company, and I just thought, that doesn't seem right. So I held on to it. I've got it in the truck. I wasn't sure who to give it to. I just stood there. I couldn't quite make my mouth work." The September air had that crisp edge to it that always reminds me Howard used to call October the best month in Iowa. And I was thinking about that, about the way he'd say it every year, instead of thinking about what Walter had just told me. Bartholomew Sweeney. I didn't know anyone by that name. I'd never known anyone by that name in 71 years of living. "Walter," I said finally, "would you bring me that envelope?" He went and got it. The return address was a title insurance outfit in Des Moines. I held it in my hands and I could feel my pulse going in my fingertips. I thanked Walter and I told him he'd done the right thing. He looked relieved. He told me if anything else came addressed to that name, he'd bring it straight to my door instead of the box. I told him I'd be obliged. I sat on the porch for a long time after he drove off. The dog, Biscuit, came and put her head on my knee. I petted her without really seeing her. I was going through the names of everyone who had a key to my house, everyone who knew my address, everyone who had access to my mailbox. The list wasn't long. My daughter Renata had a key. Renata's husband Philip had been over a few times. The cleaning lady, Yolanda, came every other Thursday, and she'd had a key for going on 6 years and never given me a single reason to mistrust her. The neighbor across the street, Joyce, had a spare for emergencies. That was it. I opened the envelope. I'm not going to pretend I understood every word of what was in those papers, because I didn't. I taught 3rd grade for 34 years before I retired. I know how to read, but real estate paperwork is its own language. What I could understand was that someone had filed paperwork to put a lien against my house. The amount was $48,000. The creditor was someone I'd never heard of, and the documents had been signed, supposedly, by me. The signature looked like mine. It looked enough like mine that if you'd shown me the page and asked if I'd signed it, I might have said yes, but I hadn't. I sat there with that envelope in my lap and I thought about what Howard would have done. Howard was a careful man. Howard bounced the checkbook every Sunday afternoon at the kitchen table with a glass of iced tea, even after we got online banking. Howard would have called somebody. Howard would have made a list. So that's what I did. I went inside. I got my notepad, and I started writing down everything I could remember about the last 2 months. Every visitor, every appointment, every time I'd left the house for more than an hour. And here's what I noticed. Every Wednesday morning, like clockwork, I went to the senior center on Linden Street. I'd been doing it for 2 years. I taught a reading group there for adults who'd never finished high school, and I led it from 9 in the morning until almost noon. Renata knew that. Philip knew that. Anyone in my family knew that. Wednesday mornings, my house was empty for 3 solid hours. I called my daughter that afternoon. I tried to keep my voice normal. I asked her how she was, how Philip was, how the kids were. Renata is 46. She lives 40 minutes away in Waterloo. She has 2 children, both of them grown, and she works as a paralegal at a firm downtown. She and I had been close once. After Howard died, we'd gone through a hard stretch where she felt like I wasn't grieving the right way, and I felt like she was trying to manage me like a problem to be solved. But we'd come out of it, or I'd thought we had. We talked once a week. She came to visit one Saturday a month. She always brought me a little something, a candle or a book or a tin of those shortbread cookies I like. On the phone, she sounded normal. She asked about my reading group. She asked about my reading group. She asked if I'd been to the doctor about the dizzy spells I'd mentioned the month before. I told her I had. I told her everything was fine. I didn't mention the envelope. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a while, and I thought about how she'd known about the dizzy spells. I'd only told her about them in passing. I told her I'd been a little lightheaded a couple of times getting up from the couch, nothing serious. But she'd asked the doctor about it as if it were a pattern, as if there were something to be concerned about, as if I were the kind of woman who needed to be watched. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept getting up and walking through the house and looking at things. The little ceramic bird Howard bought me in Charleston, the photo album on the coffee table, the drawer where I keep the household papers, everything looked the same. But I had this feeling, this awful feeling, like the air in the house wasn't mine anymore, like somebody had been breathing it. The next morning, I drove down to the bank. I sat across from a young woman named Brenna, and I told her I needed to see every transaction on my checking account and my savings account for the past 6 months. She printed it out for me. I took it home and I went through it line by line at the kitchen table with a yellow highlighter and my reading glasses, the way Howard would have done it. There were withdrawals I didn't recognize. Small ones. $200 here, $300 there. They went back 5 months, always on a Wednesday. The total came to a little over $4,000. Not enough to bankrupt me. Not enough that I'd have noticed without looking, but enough to be unmistakable. I called Walter the mailman that afternoon. I asked him if he'd be willing to come by after his route. He said he would. When he sat down at my kitchen table, I told him everything. I told him about the lien, the bank withdrawals, the Wednesdays. I asked him if he thought I was crazy. He didn't say anything for a minute. Then he said, "Mrs. Halloran, my mother had Alzheimer's. I know what crazy looks like. You're not crazy." I don't know why that's the moment I started crying, but it was. I've been holding it together for 2 days, and Walter saying that one sentence at my kitchen table just took the legs right out from under me. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He just sat there with his hands folded and waited until I was done. Then he said, "What are you going to do?" I told him I didn't know. That night, I went over to Joyce's house, the neighbor across the street, and I asked her if her grandson still worked at that electronics store at the mall. She said he did. I asked her if she thought he could help me set up some cameras. She raised her eyebrows, but she didn't ask why. Joyce and I have been neighbors since 1991. She knows when not to ask. Her grandson's name is Devin. He's 23, and he came over the next afternoon with a duffel bag full of equipment. He set up 2 little cameras for me. One was disguised as a smoke detector and went up in the hallway ceiling looking down at the front door and the living room. The other one was no bigger than a quarter, and he tucked it inside the row of cookbooks above the kitchen counter, with the lens just barely peeking out between 2 volumes. Both of them recorded to a card and also streamed to my phone. He spent over 2 hours with me, walking me through how to use the app, making me practice opening it and watching the live feed until I could do it without looking at the instructions. I tried to pay him. He wouldn't take a cent. He said his grandmother would skin him alive if he took money from me. He said if I needed anything else, any time, day or night, I should call him. He gave me his number on a piece of paper, and he made me put it in my phone before he left. People are mostly good. That's something I want to say. Through this whole thing, people were mostly good. The bad ones get all the attention, but the good ones outnumber them. Walter, Joyce, Devin. The list of people who showed up for me kept getting longer. The worse things got. That Wednesday morning, I went to the senior center like I always did. I taught my reading group. We were working through a memoir by a woman who'd grown up in the Appalachian Mountains, and the discussion got lively that morning, and for almost 3 hours I forgot what was waiting for me when I got home. Then at 12:15 I drove back, and I sat in my car in the driveway, and I opened the app on my phone. I watched the recording from the morning. At 9:47, my front door opened. 3 women came in. The first one was my daughter. I want to say something about what that moment was like, and I'm not sure I can. I'd suspected. I'd suspected for 2 days, but suspecting and seeing are not the same thing. Seeing my daughter walk into my house with her own key, with 2 strangers behind her, and then watching her drop her purse on my couch and start opening drawers in my dining room buffet like she was looking for something specific, that was a different kind of pain than I had ever felt before. Different from when Howard died. Different from when I lost my own mother. This was the kind of pain where part of who you used to be just isn't there anymore when you go looking for it. The other 2 women I didn't recognize at first. They were both around Renata's age, maybe a little older. One was tall with reddish hair pulled back tight. The other was shorter, wearing an expensive-looking blazer. They knew the house. They went to specific places. The tall one went straight to the spare bedroom where I keep the filing cabinet. The short one went into Howard's old office. Renata stood at the dining room buffet, pulling out drawer after drawer until she found what she was looking for. It was the little leather folder where Howard and I kept the deed to the house and the original copies of our wills. I sat in my car and I watched her hand it to the tall woman. I watched the tall woman pull out a manila envelope and slide our papers inside. I watched the short woman come back from Howard's office with my social security card in her hand. They were laughing, not loud laughing, just little chuckles the kind women do when they're at a kitchen table together, and one of them has just told a story that wasn't supposed to be funny. Renata said something. The audio was muffled, but I could make it out if I turned the volume all the way up. She said she has no idea. She still calls me every Sunday and asks if I want to come for pot roast. The tall woman said something I couldn't quite hear, something about a notary. The short one said, clear as a bell, honestly, at her age, it's a kindness. She'd just lose it all to a scam anyway. I closed the app. I sat in my car for I don't know how long. My hands were shaking. I think I was making some kind of sound, but I'm not sure. Eventually, Biscuit started barking inside the house, and I realized she'd been alone for hours and needed to go out. So I went inside and I let her out and I sat on the back step and I watched her sniff around the lilac bush and I cried until I didn't have any more crying in me. Then I called Walter. I didn't call the police first. I should have, maybe, but Walter was who I called. He came over within 20 minutes. He sat with me in the kitchen and he watched the recording with me, and when it was over he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "You need a lawyer. A good one, today." He had a name. His sister-in-law had used a lawyer in town the year before, a woman named Adele Pemberton. Walter called her himself right from my kitchen and explained the situation in 3 sentences, flat, and she said she'd see me at 4 o'clock that afternoon. Adele Pemberton turned out to be a small woman, maybe 60 years old, with white hair cut short and a pair of reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Her office was above a hardware store on Main Street. She had a window that looked out at the courthouse. She listened to me tell my story without interrupting once. When I was done, she said, "Mrs. Halloran, I'm going to ask you a hard question, and I need an honest answer. Do you want to recover your money, or do you want to recover your money and prosecute your daughter?" I didn't know how to answer that. I asked if I could think about it. She said I could think about it. She said I could, but not for long, because every day I waited gave them another chance to do more damage. I went home and I sat with it overnight. I thought about Renata as a little girl. I thought about her wedding day. I thought about the day Howard was diagnosed and how she'd flown home from her business trip and sat with me in the hospital cafeteria and held my hand. I thought about my granddaughter, Tessa, who is 19 and in her second year at Iowa State studying environmental science, and who calls me every other week just to talk. I thought about whether Tessa would forgive me for putting her mother in jail. In the morning, I called Adele Pemberton and I told her I wanted to prosecute. All the way, no mercy. She told me later that's what most people say at first, and then about half of them call back the next day and say they've changed their mind. I never called her back to change my mind. I want that on the record. The investigation took the better part of 3 months. The two other women turned out to be a real estate paralegal named Brenda McAllister and a woman named Deidre Vanover, whose husband was on the city council. Renata had met them in some kind of women's networking group, and the three of them had cooked the whole thing up over the course of about a year. The plan had been to drain my checking account slowly, file the lien against the house, and then approach me as concerned family members offering to help me sell the property and move into assisted living. They'd already picked out a facility for me. A nice one, but not so nice that it would burn through the proceeds before they could get their hands on what was left. When the police interviewed Renata, she cried. Of course she cried. She said she'd been struggling financially. She said Philip had lost his job 2 years ago, and they hadn't told me. She said she didn't think of it as stealing because it was going to be her money anyway someday. She said she loved me. I was in the next room. I heard most of it through the wall. The trial was in February. I sat through every day of it. My granddaughter Tessa drove down from Ames and sat next to me. She didn't say much. She held my hand a lot. When the prosecutor played the videos in court, the ones from my kitchen and my hallway, Tessa squeezed my hand so hard I thought she'd break my fingers, but I didn't say anything. I just squeezed back. The judge sentenced Renata to 4 years. Brenda McAllister got 3. Deidre Vanover got the longest, almost 6 years, because they found out she'd done something similar to her own elderly aunt back in 2019. The aunt had since died, and nobody had ever pressed charges, but the pattern was there, and the prosecutor used it. Philip filed for divorce 2 weeks after the verdict. He came to see me at my house, the only time he'd ever set foot in it without Renata being there. He stood in my kitchen and he apologized. He said he hadn't known. He said he should have known, but he hadn't. He was crying. I made him a cup of coffee and we sat at the table, and he told me about the last 2 years, about losing his job and about the financial stress, and about how Renata had started saying strange things about me that he hadn't paid enough attention to. He said he was sorry. He said it about 15 times. I told him I believed him. I think I do. Tessa moved in with me that summer. It was her idea. She transferred to the University of Northern Iowa, which is right here in Cedar Falls, and she moved into the bedroom that used to be her mother's when her mother was a teenager. She drives my car. She walks Biscuit in the morning. She started learning how to make her grandfather's chili, which I am teaching her step by step. She visits her mother in prison once a month. I don't go with her. I don't ask her about the visits, and she doesn't tell me. That's our arrangement, and it works. I'm not ready. I don't know if I ever will be. The lawyer told me I might forgive Renata one day, and I might not, and either way is a perfectly reasonable response, and I shouldn't let anyone tell me otherwise. Walter still delivers my mail. He still calls me Mrs. Halloran. Last Christmas, I gave him a gift card to the steakhouse downtown, and his wife sent me a thank you note in the form of a Christmas card with a picture of their grandkids on it. Joyce and I have coffee on her porch every Saturday morning when the weather allows. Devin, her grandson, fixed my computer last spring when it started running slow, and again he wouldn't take any money for it. I want to tell you something I learned, though I am not sure I have the right way to say it. For most of my life, I believe that the people closest to you are the ones who will catch you when you fall. That's what I was raised to believe. That's what I taught my own daughter to believe, and it isn't always true. Sometimes the people closest to you are exactly the ones you have to watch, and the people who catch you are the mailman and the neighbor across the street and a 23-year-old kid who knows about cameras. Sometimes a stranger sees you more clearly than your own blood. That isn't a sad lesson. I want to be clear. It isn't a sad lesson at all. It means there are more people in the world looking out for you than you ever knew. It means you are not as alone as your daughter wanted you to think you were. It means you have a community, and the community is wider and stronger than the family you were given. Tessa graduated last spring. She's going for her master's in the fall, and she's already been accepted, and she's staying right here. She told me she's not leaving until I tell her to leave, and I've told her she'll have to leave eventually because young women shouldn't spend their whole lives keeping their grandmother's company, and she laughed at me and said she'd think about it. I am 73 years old now. The dizzy spells turned out to be nothing. just an inner ear thing the doctor gave me drops for. I still teach my reading group every Wednesday morning. The members took up a collection last year and bought me a new coffee maker for the classroom because the old one had finally given out. I still sit on the porch every morning at 7:15 with biscuit at my feet. The cameras are still up. I leave them up. Walter teases me about them sometimes, but he understands. And every now and then I look at the front door, the door my own daughter walked through with two strangers, the door I had to learn to trust again, and I think about how close I came to never knowing. If Walter hadn't said something, if he'd just delivered that envelope and minded his business, if he'd been afraid to be wrong, or afraid to embarrass me, or afraid I'd be angry with him, he wasn't afraid. He spoke up, and that one moment of him speaking up on a Tuesday morning in late September on my own front porch is the reason I still have my house and my savings and my dignity and my life. One person, one sentence. That's all it takes sometimes. If you are someone watching this and any part of what I have said sounds familiar to you, please listen to me. Please. Don't ignore the small thing that doesn't add up. Don't tell yourself you're being paranoid or that your family would never. Look at the small thing. Look at it hard. And if you don't have a Walter in your life, find one. Find a neighbor. Find a mailman. Find a young person at the electronics store. There are good people everywhere. Find them. Let them help you. That's the whole story. That's everything I know. Thank you for sitting with me through it. I have thought about this story almost every day since it ended, and I keep coming back to the same idea. Nothing in life happens without a reason behind it, even when the reason is one we don't want to look at. My daughter Renata didn't wake up one morning and decide to steal from me. The thing she did to me was the end of a long chain of small choices. Choices she made over years. Choices her husband made. Choices I made too without realizing it. When Philip lost his job and they didn't tell me, that was a choice. When Renata started watching my bank statements over my shoulder during her visits, that was a choice. When I noticed she'd grown distant and I told myself it was just middle age, that was a choice too. Every one of those small moments built the road that led to my own daughter walking through my front door with two strangers and a manila envelope. What I have learned, sitting here at 73 years old, with a granddaughter sleeping in the next room, is that character is not something you have. It is something you build, day by day, through the small things nobody is watching. Renata stopped building hers somewhere along the way. She let resentment grow where gratitude should have been. She let entitlement settle in where work should have been. And by the time she sat down with those two women and laid out a plan to take everything from me, she wasn't a stranger to that plan. She had been becoming the kind of person who could do it for a long time. I just didn't see it. The other thing I have learned is that strength is quieter than people think. It doesn't shout. It doesn't make a scene. Strength looked like Walter the mailman holding onto an envelope for a week because something didn't feel right. Strength looked like me sitting in my car after watching that video, crying until I was empty, and then picking up the phone anyway. Strength looked like Tessa choosing to stand next to me in that courtroom, even though it broke her heart in places I will never be able to reach. None of us did anything dramatic. We just kept choosing, one moment at a time, to do the next right thing. If I could tell my younger self anything, it would be this. Pay attention. Pay attention to the people you love when they start changing. Pay attention to your own gut when something feels wrong. Pay attention to the kindness of people you might overlook. The mailman and the neighbor and the kid at the electronics store, because those are the people who will save your life one day. And keep building yourself every day in the small, unwatched moments, because the person you are becoming when nobody is looking is the person you will be when everything falls apart. That is the only thing that finally matters.